Today's lesson is Ape-Men, the Grand Deception, and we're in Series 4 of Creation versus Evolution. So the previous week, millions of years, where did the idea come from? And you can, it was 200 years ago from Europe. Next week, we go into radioactive radiocarbon dating, turning this foe into friend. At lunch, we talked about half-life. We'll get into more of that next week. Lesson 4, Evolutionary Inaccuracies. We'll look at what's being taught in the public schools and their textbooks and see if that's accurate. And the final lesson of the series is Dangers of Evolution on March 10th. Today's outline, Evolution of Man. We'll introduce that. And hopefully you'll be able to learn the difference between an ape and a human skull. And you'll find it's not that difficult. 3 ways to make an ape-man, and then review ape-men examples, and then end with the biblical view. I want to start off with a video from International Creation Ministries. It'll go into how we're being bombarded by the media with evolutionary teaching.
Most people believe the Bible is true.
Has science proven the Bible wrong?
Is creation and evolution a side issue?
Our ancestors understood origins by extrapolating from their own experience. How else could they have done it? Then science came along and taught us that we are not the measure of all things.
Simplest explanation is, there is no God. No one created the universe, and no one directs our fate.
You and I are the product of billions of
We share a common
years,
ancestor with chimpanzees.
This animal eventually became human.
I'm sorry, but if you don't understand that humans and monkeys came from a common ancestor...
Single out evolution and act as if there's some kind of major scientific dispute, and in fact...
Evolution is a fact, not a theory.
Evolution is a fact. I mean, that's right. There's no question.
Evolution isn't an opinion, it's fact.
Evolution is scientific fact.
I'm sorry, I believe in evolution.
Lived in the ocean 200 million years ago.
8 million years ago,
We emerged from microbes and muck.
I thought that might be a good way to lead off a ape-man talk. 1 Peter 3:15, always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you. And that's a third group, Creation Ministries International, creation.com. And start with what Genesis teaches. Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Psalm 100 verse 3, know that the Lord, he is God. It is he who has made us, and not we ourselves. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Probably many of you have seen a similar diagram like this, where you have the evolution of man, where evolutionists have taught that we started out as an ape-like creature, bent over, and then with time we eventually straighten up and turn into man. Also, this is a picture taken out of Time Life books back in 1966. All human beings belong to one species, and which evolved from the same early primate species that produced monkeys and related creatures. And then Time magazine, they've been pushing us evolving from ape-like creatures for generations. Here's a magazine article, How Man Began, on March 14, 1994. How Apes Became Human, July 23rd, 2001. The First Pioneer, the new find shakes the human family tree, from National Geographic in August 2002. And then Scientific American, New Look at Human Evolution, August 2003. Natural History, New Faces of the Human Past, February 2007. And Scientific American, What Makes Us Human, May 2009. So the descent from a common ancestor, they believe from goo to you by the way of the zoo. So maybe you can remember that. Because they believe we've evolved from primordial slime. It rained on the rock millions of years and then went through the zoo and came to man. Julian Huxley, in his Evolution After Darwin, Volume 3, wrote in 1960, "No room for the supernatural. In the evolutionary pattern of thought, there is no longer either need or room for the supernatural. The earth was not created, it evolved. So did animals and plants that inhabit it, including our human selves, mind and soul, as well as brain and body. And so did religion." So if you look at a textbook and talk about missing links in hominin evolution, this is an evolutionary chart, and the chart goes back to 5 million years on the bottom right. And according to evolution, both apes and humans shared a common ancestor. And on the lower left, it was called an ape-like creature. Evolutionists hate if you say we evolved from apes. They want you to say man evolved from an ape-like creature. So after 5 million years, ape-like creatures evolved into what? There you go, apes. Good answer. So we got apes came from ape-like creatures. What did dogs come from? Maybe dog-like creatures? Cats, maybe from cat-like creatures? But notice they do not take any time and effort to go from here all the way up to there. It's like, let the apes figure out their own evolution. We're concerned about man. So in the diagonal direction that's the main interest. And notice there's dotted lines here with question marks. That's because those are lines of inference, not hard data. There is no hard data in this. And they often put the question marks in the diagrams in case you don't follow the dotted lines. So eventually an ape-like creature 5 million years ago evolved into Australopithecus remidus. Australopithecus is 2 words, southern ape. So, and then after, say, several 100,000 years, we had another ape-like creature, an Australopithecus anamensis, and then we had another evolutionary jaunt to Australopithecus afarensis. And anybody hear of the ape Lucy? Okay, I see a couple in the audience. That's what Lucy was. And we'll get into Lucy for those who aren't as familiar with her. And then we get a fork in the road. We go to Australopithecus africanus, and we stop there because that ape-like creature went extinct according to the evolutionists. And then we go to Sediba, Australopithecus sediba. We'll talk about that briefly. And then eventually, 2 million years ago, we get to our genus, which is Homo, and we're part of the Homo sapiens. So that's kind of an overview of the so-called missing links where we went from ape-like creatures to where we are today. Now, there is also a recent scientific misconception out there with DNA. And has anybody heard that chimp and human DNA is almost 98% similar? Anybody hear about that at all? Well, that's when they started doing DNA comparisons, they stated that, which caused people to get confused and doubt the Bible. But what they're finding out is the claim of 98% similarity between chimpanzees and humans is not only deceptive, but it's misleading. It's also scientifically incorrect. John Sanford, in his book Genetic Entropy, he said, in fact, we know man and chimp differ at more than 150 million nucleotide positions. There is a vast difference between humans and chimpanzees in our DNA. Even millions or billions of time cannot make up these vast DNA differences. I'm going to play a video that goes into this in more detail where they didn't compare everything perfectly, and you'll see what they compared. They almost rigged the numbers, and you'll find out that that number drops dramatically. So I'll play this.
The idea that human and chimp DNA overlap by 98 to 99% has been widely used to promote the idea that humans and chimps shared a common ancestor millions of years ago. But have you considered how they came up with this estimate? One of the things that not many people know about this study is that large sections of DNA from both the human and the chimp genome were left out when making this comparison. Let's see how Minute Earth, a secular training site that holds to an evolutionary perspective, describes it.
When researchers sat down to compare the chimp and human genomes, those single-letter differences were easy to tally, but the big mismatch sections weren't. For example, if a genetic paragraph, thousands of letters long, appears twice in a human scroll, but only once in its chimp counterpart, should that second human copy count as thousands of changes, or just one? And what about identical paragraphs that appear in both genomes, but in different places, or in reverse order, or broken up into pieces? Rather than monkey around with these difficult questions, the researchers simply excluded all the large mismatch sections, a whopping 1.3 billion letters in all, and performed a letter-by-letter comparison on the remaining 2.4 billion, which turned out to be 98.77% identical. So, yes, we share 99% of our DNA with chimps if we ignore 18% of their genome and 25% of ours.
Wow. Ignoring 18% of the chimp genome and 25% of the human genome. That's a lot to ignore. In fact, this represents hundreds of millions in each side of the comparison. Could the sections they left out be responsible for coding most of the obvious differences we see between humans and chimps? The video explains.
And there's another problem. Just as a small tweak in a sentence can alter its meaning entirely, or not at all, a few mutations in DNA sometimes produce big changes in a creature's looks or behavior, whereas other times, lots of mutations make very little difference. So just counting up the number of genetic changes doesn't really tell us that much about how similar or different two creatures are.
It certainly makes sense that just counting up the number of genetic changes doesn't really tell us that much about how similar or different two creatures are. Indeed, the human and chimp genomes code for two completely different creatures. While both are mammals based on scientific criteria, God made man in His image and gave him a soul that is eternal. Chimps, which are soulless tree-dwelling animals, and humans, which are eternal souls wrapped in bodies that have vastly different capabilities than all animals, because we were created in God's image and charged to be caretakers over creation, including chimps. Being made in the image of God and charged with taking care over God's creation would mean that humans would have several distinctions from chimps. We have eye whites for rich and nuanced nonverbal communication, which no apes have. We walk upright, while chimps, with their curved fingers, long arms, and unique locking wrist systems, are designed for living in trees and walking on all fours. Their knees also point outward for climbing in trees, whereas our knees point forward so we can walk or run all day if needed. We can't even swap any of our internal organs with chimps. Humans build space shuttles, write songs, worship, pray, and sing. Chimps don't do any of these things. God specifically designed us, formed the first of us from dust into the image of God, and gave each of us an everlasting soul. We were charged to be caretakers over the entire animal kingdom. Yes, we share vast DNA sequences with chimps, but we should expect this on the basis of creation. We also share plenty of DNA with mammals other than chimps. After all, God made mammals and man to metabolize the same food sources, grow the same basic materials like bones, teeth, muscles, skin, and hair, and produce placentas and milk for the next generation. The fact that we have sections of DNA that are similar to these creatures only shows that our designer used similar DNA instructions for making similar features and functions. It does not mean that one creature led to the other. Bible-believing geneticist Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins said, "The programmer doesn't start from scratch each time he develops a new program. Instead, he uses the same general command that he used for other projects. It shows the creator's efficiency and ingenuity. We see the same pattern of both similarity and differences in organisms' genomes. Biblical creationists say the similarities in DNA arose because the same creator adapted the same basic code for separate created kinds. If a gene in different creatures encodes a similar protein for a similar biochemical pathway, it's not due to evolution, but because of a single programmer. This similarity is a hallmark of all human-engineered systems, so why should we not expect to see it in God's creation?" Clearly, overhyped stories of chimp-human similarities overlook some basic observations. They overlook huge sections of DNA. They overlook the possibility of intentional programming to explain similar DNA sequences. And they overlook unbridgeable physical, mental, and moral differences that all fit the Bible's idea of divine creation.
Hopefully that describes it well enough. Now let's do a comparison. How can you determine if a fossil is an ape or human? And I will let Dr. David Menton describe that in one of his videos where he gives you a basic lesson, and then pay close attention, because then we're going to do a quiz and go through a couple skulls, and then you tell me whether it's an ape skull or a human skull. Okay.
What is the difference between an ape and a human? It's no good talking about evidence for Ape-Men if you don't know the difference between an ape and a human. I believe God made apes, he made humans, he just didn't make ape humans. So that means whenever we look at a fossil that's supposed to be an ape-man, if you know what to look for, you ought to be able to quickly tell whether it's a human or an ape. The first difference between an ape and a human that I've listed here are the nasal bones. On an ape, the nasal bones are flat. This is a chimpanzee. It's supposed to be the closest living relative to man. You see how flat that is? The only thing that protrudes is soft tissue. But notice this is flat. You cannot break an ape's nose. There's nothing to break. Now, there are two bones that make up what we call the nasal bones. They're kind of triangular. In a human, they're like a pup tent, like this, see? But an ape, they're like a collapsed pup tent. Same bones, homology is real. Both have nasal bones. Here's a human. In fact, I have an interesting way to tell whether a creature is an ape or not by simply establishing that apes can't wear glasses. You see, you put glasses on the skull. Forget about the ears. Skulls don't have ears. But you see how it slides down the nose here? There's nothing to hold these glasses. Man alive, you put it on a human, it just sits in there like that, huh? So the nasal bones, as you can see here, protrude on the human. There's also a nasal spine. You can feel it under here. And that's what you break if you break your nose. The rest is all cartilage and soft tissue. So you can tell right away, if that's the only evidence you had, you could pick out the apes from the humans that fast. But I believe in being more thorough. The next one is apes have a slope face and humans have a vertical face. Let's just examine that. Here's our ape. We call this a sloped face. This is like, duh. Somebody said, yeah, but what if you hold it like that, then it's vertical? No, you go by the cheekbones, the zygomatic arch you feel right here. If those cheekbones are parallel with the table or the floor, that's about the way the head is carried in the body. And then it's the slope of the face compared to the cheekbone. Now compare that to a human. And again, if this is not like obvious, raise your hand, we'll go through it again. Here's a human, got the cheekbones parallel with the table, and the face is vertical. If this is all you knew, believe me, you could sort out the apes from the humans that fast. A 5-year-old could. In fact, I have 5-year-olds in the class. Sometimes they get it just fine. So anyway, that's sloped versus vertical face. The next one is the forehead. The forehead of the ape is flat, and that of the human is curved, and that impacts on the orbit of the eye, making the orbit of the eye of the ape hard to see from the side. The human is quite visible. This is a human. The forehead is curved. I've heard that this is an adaptation so Norwegians can go oofta, but it may not be true. But see how it's curved? Because it's curved, you can look right into the orbits from the side. Surgeons can get all the way behind the eye, in fact, even pull the eye out a ways, without cutting any bone. That's because the face is curved. Take a look at any ape. I don't care. Pick one. This is a chimp. Barely see that it has orbits from the side because it's flat. This bone comes way out to the edge here. See that? Is this stuff all just completely obvious to you? It should be very straightforward. Last one. Apes have a small cranial capacity. Humans have a large one, relatively speaking. What are we talking about? Apes, rarely larger than 400 or 500 cc's up here. And humans, average about 1,500 cc's. Pygmy or something can go as low as 700 or so, 800. By the way, size of brain has nothing to do with intelligence within a species, as long as it's in the normal range. You want proof that nobody will argue with? On average, women have a brain 100 cc's smaller than men. That ought to lay to rest any notion that it has correlation to intelligence. What is it correlating to? Well, on average, women are probably that percentage smaller than males. So it reflects body size. Big people have big brains and little people have little brains. Are big people automatically smarter than little people? Of course not. And when you compare between creatures, between different species and what have you, then of course there's no comparison. For example, an elephant has a much larger brain than we do, but they're not that much smarter.
Okay, so hopefully you got a good sense. So let's do a quiz here. Let's look at saliva. Ape or human? We got saliva on the left. I guess it would be your left, and human skull on the right. So let's look for a protruding nasal bone. Do we see it on saliva? No. Good. What about the human? Right. So on saliva, no. So that means it's a what? Right. Good. You already caught on. Sloped or vertical face, and we'll put in some drawings to help out. Saliva, is that sloped or vertical? Right. Sloped. And then the human? Vertical. So is saliva ape or human? Ape. Slope face, it's an ape. Next one, visibility of the orbits or the eyes from the side. On saliva, can we see the eye on the side, or is it kind of hidden?
Yes, you can.
It's now compared to the human. See how the human's eye, we can see it on the angle. This one, it's just an indentation, but you can't really see like the orbit too much. Since it's not as obvious as the human, no visibility. So would that mean it's an ape or human? Ape, right. Cranial capacity. Remember he said smaller brains are apes, bigger brains are humans. Saliva has 400 cubic centimeters of brain matter, and the human has 1,500 cubic centimeters. So is saliva small or large brain? Right. 400 cc's. So would that be an ape or human? So everything checks off. And so the answer is saliva is an ape. Quiz number 2. Ardipithecus ramidus. And let's go through some of them. Is that an ape or a human? Nasal bone. Do we see a nasal bone here at all? These are the eyes, a little bit of an eye socket, but no, it's pretty flat. Is this a sloped face if we were to put lines? Yes. Are the orbits visible? Well, it's not a good example, but the answer is supposed to be no. Cranial capacity, 300 cc's. Small. So, what do you think? Is that an ape or human? Right. Very good. Nutcracker man. Let's look at this one. Nasal bone. Do you see one? No. Slope face? Right. Orbits visible? Yeah, so if it was on the side, you wouldn't be able to see the orbits. That's not a good question, I guess. But the answer's supposed to be no, because it's looking at us. if it was on this angle, we wouldn't be able to see it. Cranial capacity, very small, right? Whoops. So it's an ape. Okay, Cro-Magnon man. Let's run through it. Nasal bone, do we see one? Yeah. Vertical face? Yeah. Orbits visible. Cranial capacity 1600 cc, small or large. So what is it? Human. Right, human. See? You passed the quiz, not too hard, right? Now, there's 3 ways to make an ape-man. Ape-man. One is to combine ape and man. Another one is to downscale man so they look like an ape. And I'll give some examples of these. And another way is to upscale apes so they look like humans. So let's look at a couple examples. Combining ape with man. Anybody in the audience heard of Piltdown man at all? See a couple hands up. Piltdown man. Parts of Piltdown man were found between 1908 and 1912 in Piltdown, England. They found portion of a human skull, and they said that the lower jawbone was orangutan lower jawbone and 2 molar teeth, and a chimp canine tooth. So it claimed to be part ape and part man. And they said, we found our intermediate link between apes and man. And they said the age was 500,000 years ago. But how do they know it was that old? You didn't have dating mechanisms back in 1908 and 1912 like carbon-14 or potassium, argon, and other methods. The answer is they wanted it to be this date because remember they started introducing millions of years, 200 years ago, and they were really wanting this ape-like creature to come out of the ground. They were so convinced that the New York Times posted this in December 22, 1912, Darwin theory proved true. And this is an excerpt from the article. A discovery of supreme importance was announced at the Geological Society on 18 December 1912, a part of the most ancient 500,000 years inhabitant of England, if not Europe. The remains thus far recovered leave no possible doubt but that they represent a man who must be regarded as affording us a link with our remote ancestors, the apes. Also, if you ever heard of the Scopes trial in Tennessee in 1925, anybody hear that? Yep. Okay, you visited. Okay, great. They used this as evidence for the Scopes trial, Piltdown man. It turned out to be a hoax. November 1953, Time magazine published scientific evidence proving that Piltdown man was a forgery. 1912 to 1953. Yeah.
A lot of people by then.
Yes, exactly, Hallinson.
And probably not 1/3 of the people who saw the first one saw that it was a misleading information.
Yep, probably a lot of people passed on and went thinking they found it. I can't trust the Bible anymore.
Yeah.
The fossil was a composite of three species. It consisted of a human skull, carbon dated not 500,000 years ago, 520 to 720 years old. The lower jaw was that of an orangutan, and there was a chimpanzee fossil tooth inserted. So someone had created the appearance of age. They actually went through the effort to stain the bones with an iron solution and add chromic acid. Here's in the Reader's Digest where they publicized it, the Great Piltdown Hoax. When they looked at it, and my understanding was scientists were being shielded from actually looking at the fossil itself for decades. So when they examined and they revealed that the file marks on the teeth because it was an orangutan jaw, and orangutans have bigger teeth. They filed it down to make it look human, and no one looked at the teeth. It was deduced from this that someone had modified the teeth to shape more suited to a human diet. Someone buried this 600-year-old fraudulent skull, and then science claimed that this was an evolutionary link for 40 years without doing a scientific verification study. So this was a hoax for 40 years. Another way to make an ape man is making apes out of men. Anyone hear of Neanderthal man? Okay, I think everyone's heard of him. Well, let's look at the history books. Neanderthal, first fossils found in the Neander Valley in Germany in 1856, depicted him as a heavy-boned and hairy type of ape-like, man-like creature, and they depicted him as an ape-like head, and he stooped over in the shoulders. They found more skeletons in Europe and Israel and other places. Now, evolutionists are saying, after looking at it and comparing it to humans, if you dressed up a Neanderthal, put him in a coat, tie, and top hat, put him in Grand Central Station, New York City, he would look like a man today. In fact, this is what their skeleton looks like. If you see here on the side, they have like a little bigger bun in the back of their skull. Their teeth were bigger. They could handle the wisdom teeth that we can't handle today. And they just lived after the flood. A lot of them lived in caves, up near the Ice Age area. But it's absolutely human. Time magazine did Changing Faces of Neanderthal. Here's March 1873, Harper's Weekly, Neanderthal hunter with the foot of his trade, so he kind of looked brutish. Here's 1909, looking more ape-like, hunched over. Here's 1953, where an actor's looks like he's courting a woman. 1984, looks like he's ready to eat a frog. 1988, might need to go to a dentist, but he looks more human-like. CNN 2006, kind of looks human. Might need a shaver. Newsweek, there's a hairy Neanderthal in March 2007, and Science Daily, August 2008. There is this Neanderthal museum in Germany, and it says from his bestial 19th century persona to just another guy in a suit, Neanderthals have been pigeonholed according to the times. They did some forensic reconstruction of a Neanderthal man. Also, they have brow bridge that sticks out more than we do today. And, looking at that, in the fossil record, you don't have any noses or even ears. You can't, the person who drew this just made him with big ears and a big nose. We have no idea what they may have looked like. So that was an artist design, but looks pretty human. And in fact, they did a reconstruction of a Neanderthal child's face, and she doesn't look subhuman. That just looks like a girl of today. Of course, her hair looks kind of matted, and her clothes look bad, but she could go with I think it's a 13-year-old girl today. So archaeological evidence, Neanderthals were 100% human. They found out that they made sophisticated spears, needles, and stone tools. They used makeup, seashell jewelry. They hunted dolphins and seals. They controlled the use of fire and cooked food. They built huts from animal skins. They even made flutes out of bare femurs, and there's kind of a depiction of a flute that they found. And they cared for the sick, and they had ceremonial burying their dead. Richard Leakey even said the arrangement of flowers was not random. They were carefully placed around the body, a concern for the fate of human soul, a ritual burial. They possess the hyoid bone or voice box, almost identical to modern humans. I have a clip here. Neanderthal genome confirms they were human from creation.com.
Every time I hear of Neanderthal man, I can't help but feel sorry for the poor guy. Initially reconstructed to look like some apish brute, it took 44 years before a reanalysis of the fossils revealed that Neanderthal man's anatomy was very similar to yours and mine. Neanderthals buried their dead, which isn't the sort of behavior you'd expect from an animal. What's more, discovery of ornaments, tools and stone-tipped spears reveal a high level of sophistication. Neanderthals made their own superglue from pitch, and flute-like structures found with their remains suggest they enjoyed music. But what did Neanderthal man really look like? In recent years, researchers have answered this question by using computerized reconstructions, commonly used in forensic science. These studies show that Neanderthal man looked remarkably similar to you and I. If he was dressed in a suit and walked past you in the street, you probably wouldn't notice him.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.
So the third way to make an ape-man is making men out of apes. We have two examples, and you'll find this pretty amazing. First is Nebraska man. Anyone hear of Nebraska man at all? Couple. And then the second one is Australopithecus, which is Lucy, the southern ape. So let's go over Nebraska man. 1922 fossil evidence was discovered in Nebraska. You know, they keep finding these ape-like creatures that pop up, and they're over in Europe. Now we have our own ape-like creature. So 1922, they said they found fossil evidence. It was used to support evolution in the 1925 Scopes trial in Tennessee as well. So they had one that became falsified. Let's check Nebraska man. Maybe since it's from the U.S., this is legit. They claimed his age was 1 million years old, and it was an intermediate link between apes and men. First of all, how do they know it was 1 million years old? There was no dating mechanism back in 1925 yet. Answer is they wanted it to be this date. So with Nebraska man, they created a complete picture, his wife and the environment that he lived. And you can see that diagram up there is the environment that they lived. And it was, you can even see the same picture in Wikipedia today. So they must have had all kinds of fossil evidence, right, to do a picture of him and his wife and what they may have, environment around where they're at. Well, you know, the only fossil evidence they found was one tooth. One tooth. That was it. From a single tooth, they were able to create the entire Nebraska man, his wife, the environment he lived in. And you can go to the Creation Museum in Glen Rose, Texas, to see a duplicate of the Nebraska man tooth. 1927, they found the rest of the fossils that went with the tooth. It was not an ape tooth. It was not a human tooth. It was a pig's tooth. First time, pig made a monkey out of a man. So what's the real Nebraska man? Right there. So yet another fraud. And these two frauds were used in the Scopes trial. Okay, I got a summary of what we just talked about with Genesis Apologetics on Ape-Men frauds.
So, how'd you say this trunk helped you?
Well, I'm starting to get the picture on human evolution. This book was published in 1925 by Sir Arthur Keith. And now he was the president of the Royal Anthropological Society of Great Britain.
And the skull?
It was found in 1912. Now, it called Piltdown Man the find of the 20th century. I think it was the New York Times said that it proves the theory of evolution. There were like 500 articles published when they first found this. Then in 1953, they discovered that the skull was a fake.
Are you serious?
Oh, yeah. They took chemicals and they aged the skull. They made it look like it was really, really old. And then the jaw is actually from an orangutan. And the guy who discovered it, he actually filed the teeth down and made it look real.
What the heck were scientists thinking?
Have you ever heard of Nebraska man? Nebraska man was the first American ape-man fossil to be discovered, and Harold Cook found just a tooth.
Bet that made for us some news and museum display.
Yeah, well, it was big enough for the New York Times, okay? And then it went viral for back then, and the London News did a whole drawing on it from a single tooth. There's still a picture of him on Wikipedia.
They drew all that based on a tooth?
Yeah, but 10 years later, they discovered out that that tooth was actually from an extinct pig.
No way.
Yeah, so Piltdown man was the popular proof for evolution for 40 years, and Nebraska man was the popular proof for 10.
Makes you wonder about what they're teaching us today.
Now let's talk about Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, discovered by Donald Johansen in Ethiopia in 1974. And those are the actual bones they found from Lucy. It was scattered across a big area. They dated her to be 3 million years old. About 40% complete, lacking nearly all foot and hand bones. Those are key because they make Lucy look human, but there were no foot and hand bones found. The skull and jaw primitive by ape standards. Knee joint has high carrying angle. London's Natural Museum, History Museum, that's a picture of Lucy. Notice her hands and her feet are human-like. She's standing up straight up. Upright posture, human-like. Face is ape-like. But many evolutionists believe that this is an accurate depiction of Lucy. Now let's go to the Chicago Field Museum in the U.S. Notice the following. Lucy has more of an eyebrow ridge, more robust. Hands and feet are human-like. Upright posture like a human, and a face like an ape. And here's a picture of Lucy in the St. Louis Zoo in their Living World exhibit. And some features: trunks, breasts, and genitalia, arms and hands, legs and feet all look human-like. Upright posture and showing a little gait. Obviously, with the left foot forward, she had model training. And she knows to point the toe forward to extend the leg. Do you ever see an ape with legs like that? So let's zoom into the head, the human-like features. Notice they put a pensive gaze on Lucy. Appears like she's thinking. Like, did I blow out the fire before I left the cave? Whites in the eyes. You know how hard it is to find whites or sclera in the fossil record with eyeballs? You don't see it. And most apes don't have whites in their eyes. They do if they like turn to the side, it's deep in there, but most apes, this is an artist's interpretation. So putting more white in the eye makes it look human. Finger bones are straight and will show that that wasn't the fact. Whole hand is clearly human-like, where she could play a piano or a guitar. In fact, the evidence shows the curvature of Lucy's fingers were that of a knuckle walker, where they have long fingers and they can lock their knuckles so they could walk on all fours. So the science says she was a knuckle walker. And this is what came out of Science News, April 8th, 2000. Lucy on the ground with knuckles. Lucy had wrists capable of locking the hands in place during knuckle walking. And here's another creation.com on Lucy the knuckle walker.
If you have ever tried to knuckle walk on all fours like a gorilla, you'd soon realize that it's difficult to do. But some apes do this with ease, partly because they have specialized wrist joints, which we don't have. Australopithecus afarensis, also known as Lucy, is an ape-like creature that some claim is our ancestor. Evolutionary books show pictures of Lucy walking upright, so you wouldn't expect her to have knuckle-walking wrist joints. But recently, scientists were shocked to discover this wrist joint structure in Lucy's kind. According to one of the researchers, I walked over to the cabinet, pulled out Lucy, and shazam! She had the morphology that was classic for knuckle walkers. If Lucy really is our ancestor who walked upright, why does her wrist anatomy suggest she walked on all fours? It just does not add up.
So this is Lucy's human foot at the St. Louis Zoo. other than the excess hair, that foot looks very human. But when they looked at other Australopithecus afarensis, they found out that the toes were more ape-like, as an Australopithecus. So this human foot that they're shown at St. Louis Zoo is grossly unscientific. But why did they push Lucy to have human feet? Well, Mary Leakey in 1972 in Tanzania discovered these footprints. They dated it 4 million years old, but the trail went 73 feet long, consisting of 20 larger human footprints and 27 smaller human footprints. And you can see in the image up there. So we have human footprints in the same area where they found Lucy's bones. So they figured, well, Lucy must have been walking, because you can't have a human that old. So we have to put Lucy walking, making those footprints. But if you look at it, there's big toe in line with a foot, small toes cling to the ground, well-developed arch, weight carried from heel to side of foot. That imprint looks like a human. If you ever saw the foot of an ape, I have it here. It's up here on the upper right. An ape has a great big toe so they can grab hold of the tree. So an ape can't walk like that. And William Howlers from Harvard said, Russell Tuttle of the University of Chicago, leading expert on hominoid gaits and limbs, finds that all aspects of the footprints, especially toe proportions, are remarkably like modern human feet, and that the afar feet are scientifically less than human. Also, the last thing I want to cover on Lucy is the pelvis. A chimp pelvis is sprayed out. A human pelvis has like curves. That way we can stand erect. Here is a video I'm going to play on Lucy's pelvis is wrong. And you'll find out what they tried to do to make it fit to look human. I'll play this, I think it goes 2.5 minutes. And this is Dr. Menton talking about it.
The ape that stood up, it was a revolutionary idea. We needed Owen Lovejoy's expertise again, because the evidence wasn't quite adding up. The knee looked human, but the shape of her hip didn't. Superficially, her hip resembled a chimpanzee's, which meant that Lucy couldn't possibly have walked like a modern human. But Lovejoy noticed something odd about the way the bones had been fossilized.
When I put the two parts of the pelvis together that we had, this part of the pelvis has pressed so hard and so completely into this one that it caused it to be broken into a series of individual pieces which were then fused together in later fossils.
So you see they were broken and they don't fit together properly. They did speculate in the program as to exactly who was responsible for breaking the hip, and current scientific evidence suggests perhaps a deer stepped on it. Here you can see a deer foot stepping on the bone. Isn't that a bummer? Let's see where it goes from here.
This has caused the two bones, in fact, to fit together so well that they're in an anatomically impossible position.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's.
And it did.
But all was not lost.
This is a power saw, friends. You may want to put your goggles on.
Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster.
Notice he's removing whole parts, not just cutting.
He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle.
Look how perfect! You can read a newspaper through the hole.
As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
Yeah, no, this is what we call science. You can teach this in the public schools, but you can't criticize it, because if you do, that would be religious.
Okay, so you can see what extent they go to make their theory true. Okay, so we'll end with what the Bible teaches about man. Genesis 2, verse 7, God made man. Then the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. 1 Corinthians 15:45. And so it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. So the Bible teaches man plus divine breath gives him a living being. The first man, Adam, became a living being in 1 Corinthians 15:45. This theistic evolution says a living creature and divine breath makes him man. A little bit opposite of what the Bible teaches. So in Genesis 3:19, in the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. When Adam died, he returned to the dust. On the way, he did not become an ape-like creature or an hominid without a soul. And then God made woman, Genesis 2:21-22. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh in its place. Then the rib which the Lord God had taken from him, he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man. And then Adam said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She will be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Genesis 3:20, Eve, the mother of all living. And Adam called his wife's name Eve, because she was the mother of all living. So the Bible's crystal clear. There are only two individuals from the beginning, both made supernaturally. Adam from the dust, Eve from a rib or a part of a man, and they were not made from a non-human. Also, Jesus taught creation and marriage, Matthew 19:4-5. And he answered and said to them, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? And he said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And in Genesis 2:24, where God made marriage, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So if you believe the Bible that God created Adam, and Adam's in our past, God is the authority, God sets the rules. It's not a matter of your opinion or my opinion or a majority vote in America or Congress. But if ape is in your past, then you have relative morality, then man sets the rules. It becomes the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest. If you have the power, it's okay to exploit other people, and it's the law of nature. I'll bring up this example. Anyone hear of Jeffrey Dahmer? He wrote this after he killed people. If a person doesn't think that there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway. I always believed the theory of evolution is truth, that we all just came from slime. When we died, that was it. There was nothing. When we die, we're done. American atheists, it's a myth, said this: no Adam and Eve means no need for a savior. It also means that the Bible can't be trusted as a source of unambiguous literal truth. It's completely unreliable because it all begins with a myth, and it builds on that as a basis. No fall of man means no need for atonement and no need for a redeemer. Some comments. The origin of man is a gospel issue. It's just not a scientific issue. We have many Christian leaders and evangelical scholars saying there wasn't an Adam and Eve, and it doesn't matter. But it does matter because it's the foundation of the gospel. Jesus did not die for animals. He died for human beings as people who are made in the image of God. So the scientist says man evolved from apes. Take my word for it. And God said, I created Adam and Eve supernaturally. Take my word for it. So who do we trust? Trevor Longman, an Old Testament scholar, doubts a literal Adam. Dinesh D'Souza, in his book, What's So Great About Christianity, believes Adam's body evolved from ape-like creature. And this idea is contrary to the Bible. Francis Collins, leader of the Human Genome Project, founded BioLogos Foundation, also I think recently retired from the director of NIH, believes in human evolution. William Dembski, professor of Southwestern Seminary, believes Adam and Eve were created outside of the garden as animals, became human, entering the garden. And so there's some examples of so-called Christian leaders not believing in the Bible. Here's a quote. There is a popular image of human evolution that you find all over the place. On the left of the picture, there's an ape. On the right, a man. Between the two is a succession of figures that become more and more like humans. Our progress from ape to human looks so smoothly and so tidy. It's such a beguiling image that even the experts are loath to let it go. But it's an illusion. So the evolution of man is an illusion. It's also a deception. And I'll end with 2 Thessalonians 2:11. For this reason God will send them strong delusion that they should believe the lie. So before I close, any questions? Yes, Terry.
In the tradition of not asking a question, the interesting parallel between 100 years ago when you end up with being told that this is fact, you don't argue with science.
Yep.
And the church capitulated.
Yep.
And 100 years later, you don't argue with science. The church capitulates in different ways, up to and including saying that no, it's not the elders of the church who are the ones given by Christ to determine whether, like things like whether a church should be open or not, but it's actually the state. So in one way or another, you've got the church-state issue, you've got who's really in charge issue, and also if you go back 100 years ago, you have scientists and to the eugenics issue.
Yeah.
So it's not like this is.
And we'll get into that more in 2 weeks.
It repeats itself, but while it repeats itself, it comes out in different ways. It shows itself in different lies or different so-called truths, but you don't argue with whoever the establishment is because you don't.
Yeah, good parallels to 100 years ago, what we just experienced with COVID. Any other comments? I do have 3 questions. One, when we looked at the ape and human skulls, can anyone identify a difference between the two? Just one of the examples. Anyone volunteer the answer? Think of... Yep, okay, yep. Slanted face, slope versus vertical. The nasal bones, if you feel your right here, you can feel the bone. Apes don't have a nasal bone.
And the curved forehead.
What's that?
And the curved forehead for the one.
Yep, exactly. Curved forehead, which the apes are flat, so you can't, on the side, you can't see their orbits. You can see ours because our forehead's curved. Yep. I think we covered it. Yep. Number 2, name one of the 3 ways to make an ape-man. Anyone remember those?
Mix of ape and a man.
Good. Yeah. And then the only other 2 is to think of downscaling man to an ape, and then that was with Neanderthal. They tried to make him look like an ape, but he was really a man. And then upscale ape to a man. And that's what they did with the two frauds, the Piltdown man and Nebraska pig man. Okay. And then, name an ape-man example. I forgot about this question. Name one of the examples we covered. Yep. Oops. That is it. Thank you.